Who did you give your children's outgrown clothes recently? Dr. Ifeanyi asked, his voice calm but firm. Welcome to Treeside-Tales, a home of beautiful African stories. Nkechi was married to Chief Amadi, a wealthy and influential Igbo businessman. Their life was a picture of luxury and comfort. They lived in a sprawling mansion in Lagos, complete with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and everything money could buy. Nkechi, with her grace and poise, was the heart of their home, a devoted wife and mother to their 3 beautiful children. Though life had blessed Nkechi with wealth and privilege, she never forgot her humble beginnings in her village. Every Christmas, Chief Amadi insisted that they visit the village to reconnect with family and the community. This tradition reminded them of their roots and the values that shaped their lives. That Christmas, as usual, the Amadis packed their luxury SUVs with gifts and foodstuff and made their way to the village. The house was abuzz with activity as they handed out gifts to relatives and neighbours. One afternoon, Nkechi decided to take a walk to the village market, where she ran into her former colleague when they were still single, Oluchi. Oluchi's appearance shocked Nkechi. Once vibrant and full of life, Oluchi now looked tired and frail. Her clothes were worn, and her sandals were falling apart. She carried a small basket of vegetables she hoped to sell for a few naira. Nkechi, is it really you? Oluchi's face lit up despite her weary look. Oluchi! Nkechi exclaimed, hugging her tightly. It's been so long. How are you? Oluchi hesitated before answering, her eyes welling with tears. Nkechi, life has not been kind. My husband has no work, and we can barely feed our children. Every day is a struggle. Nkechi's heart broke. She couldn't bear to see her friend in such a state. Oluchi, come to my house tomorrow, she said firmly. I will do something to help you. The next day, Oluchi arrived at the Amadi family's grand village home, a stark contrast to her own. Nkechi welcomed her warmly and led her to a seat. I cannot solve all your problems today, Nkechi said gently, but I can help you get back on your feet. She went to her children's room and carefully packed their outgrown clothes and shoes. She added bags of rice, oil, and other foodstuff. Finally, she placed a generous sum of money in an envelope and handed everything to Oluchi. Take these for now, Nkechi said. When we get back to Lagos, I will speak to my husband. We'll find work for you and your husband. Oluchi was overwhelmed. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Nkechi, thank you. May God bless you and your family. Nkechi smiled and helped her up. No need to thank me. That's what friends are for. As Oluchi walked home with the gifts, a storm of emotions brewed in her heart. At first, she felt gratitude, but the closer she got to her small, crumbling house, the more envy began to take over. She looked at the clothes, shoes, and money in her hands and thought of Nkechi's mansion, her fine clothes, her children who lacked for nothing. Why does Nkechi have everything while I have nothing? She thought bitterly. We worked together, and I was even earning more than her back then. But look at where she is, and look at me. When she reached her house, her children ran out to greet her. Their excitement over the gifts should have warmed her heart, but instead, it made her anger grow. She thought of how Nkechi's children must have new clothes every month, while hers wore hand-me-downs from strangers. Her husband, Eze, returned home later that night, his face tired and defeated. I couldn't find any work today, he said, collapsing into a wooden chair. Oluchi stared at him, her anger boiling. Do you know Nkechi gave me these things as if I'm a beggar? She lives in a palace while we live in this shack. Nkechi that I was even helping back then at work. Eze sighed. Oluchi, be grateful, at least she's helping us. But Oluchi couldn't let it go. The next day, She shared her frustration with her neighbour, Ebele, a woman known for her sharp tongue and daring ideas. Nkechi thinks she's better than you, Ebele said, fanning the flames of jealousy. Do you think she gave you those things out of kindness? She wants to show off her wealth and make you feel small. Oluchi's anger turned into resentment. I won't let her look down on me, she said. I'll show her. Ebele had an idea. There's a native doctor on the outskirts of the village. He can change fortunes. Take these clothes and money to him. He'll use them to bring Nkechi's family down. Oluchi hesitated. Isn't that too much? Too much? Ebele scoffed. She gave you scraps and made you feel grateful. Don't you want your children to have a better life? Oluchi thought about it. She remembered Nkechi's luxurious house, her perfect family, and her promises to help Oluchi and Eze. Promises that felt more like pity. Slowly, her bitterness overtook her better judgment. The next morning, Oluchi packed the clothes, shoes, and money, and made her way to the native doctor. His house was hidden among trees, eerie and quiet. The smell of burning herbs filled the air. What do you want? The native doctor asked. I want to bring down the family who gave me these things, Oluchi said, her voice trembling with anger. I want their children to suffer and their wealth to vanish. The native doctor studied her for a moment. Are you ready to pay the price? Yes, Oluchi replied, her bitterness drowning out her fear. The native doctor examined the pile of clothes carefully, his sharp eyes narrowing as he turned over a small pair of shoes in his hands. He looked up at Oluchi, his voice low and deliberate. These clothes, he said, carry the essence of the children who wore them before. Because they belonged to Nkechi's children, the curse will target anyone who has worn them, starting with the family who first owned them. Their connection to the clothes is strong, and the spell will take hold of their health and fortune. Oluchi's heart raced as the implications sank in. You mean the sickness will affect Nkechi's children? The native doctor nodded solemnly. Yes, because these were their clothes first. The bond is tied to their energy. The curse will bring sickness to the children who wore these garments, and it will not stop until their parents are brought to ruin. He spread the clothes across a wooden table, sprinkling them with a dark powder made of crushed herbs and ashes. As he muttered incantations, his voice rose and fell, creating a rhythm that seemed to fill the room with an oppressive weight. These garments will carry your will, he said, his voice deep and commanding. Those who have worn them, the ones who originally owned them, will feel their vitality slip away. They will grow weak, and no medicine will heal them. Their parents will empty their coffers, searching for cures that will never work. Their wealth will vanish, and their happiness will crumble. Oluchi stared at the pile of clothes, a mix of fear and anger in her heart. She imagined Nkechi's beautiful, healthy children falling ill, and their lavish life slowly falling apart. Her bitterness drowned out her unease. Do it, she said, her voice trembling. I want them to suffer for thinking they could control me with their scraps. The native doctor continued his work, tying the clothes into a bundle with black and red threads. He held the bundle over a small fire, chanting louder now. The flames danced wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It is done, he declared. The curse is tied to these clothes. The sickness will find those who have worn them, and their family's wealth will bleed away like water through their fingers. They will suffer as long as their pride keeps them blind. Oluchi felt a strange thrill of power as she watched the fire consume the final threads of the bundle. The thought of Nkechi's perfect life unraveling brought a twisted satisfaction. But deep in her heart, a tiny voice whispered doubt, a voice she quickly silenced as she turned to leave the native doctor's hut. 1 week after they returned to Lagos, the curse began subtly, creeping into Nkechi's life like an unseen storm. At first, it was small things. Her children feeling unusually tired or catching minor colds that lingered longer than expected. Nkechi thought little of it. After all, children fell sick from time to time, and with Lagos's busy life, she chalked it up to stress and weather changes. But the illnesses grew worse. Her youngest child, Buchi, was the first to show alarming symptoms. Buchi, who had been a lively 3-year-old, started losing her appetite. Her once round cheeks became sunken, her energy drained. She could barely play with her siblings, and her laughter, once a constant melody in the house, was replaced by faint cries of discomfort. Nkechi grew worried and took Buchi to the family doctor, who ran several tests. Nothing serious, the doctor assured her. Maybe it's just a virus. She'll recover soon. But Buchi didn't recover. Instead, her condition worsened. She developed a persistent fever, and her body became frail. Nights became a nightmare as Nkechi and Chief Amadi took turns monitoring Ada, who frequently woke up crying from pain they couldn't identify. Soon, the other 2 children, Kene and Obinna, began showing similar symptoms. Once robust and healthy, they started losing weight rapidly. Their once bright eyes were now dull, and they were plagued by constant fatigue. Kine developed mysterious rashes on her skin that no cream could soothe, while Obinna complained of severe headaches that left him wailing in agony. Desperate, Nkechi and Chief Amadi visited some of the best hospitals in Lagos, running every test the doctors could suggest. They were poked and prodded, scanned and observed. Desperate, Nkechi and Chief Amadi visited some of the best hospitals in Lagos, running every test the doctors could suggest. They were poked and prodded, scanned and observed, but the results were always the same. Nothing seemed to be medically wrong. "This is very unusual," one specialist finally admitted, his voice tinged with confusion. "They appear healthy on paper, but their symptoms tell another story. Perhaps you should consult another hospital." The lack of answers gnawed at Nkechi's spirit. She couldn't sleep at night, listening to her children's labored breathing. Chief Amadi, usually calm and composed, was beginning to unravel. His frustration over the mystery of their children's sickness mixed with the growing pressure from his struggling businesses. While Nkechi battled her children's declining health, Chief Amadi was fighting another war. His once thriving businesses began to crumble. Contracts he had secured for years were suddenly cancelled without explanation. Long-time clients pulled out of deals, claiming uncertainty or competition from rivals. One of his factories suffered a sudden fire, resulting in millions of naira in damages. "We'll recover," Chief Amadi reassured Nkechi, but even he didn't believe it. His bank accounts, which had always been full, were draining quickly as he poured money into finding solutions for his children's mysterious illnesses and trying to keep his businesses afloat. Bills began to pile up: hospital bills, repair costs, and unpaid debts. For the first time in their marriage, Nkechi and Chief Amadi sat at their dining table late at night, discussing the possibility of selling some of their assets. "We have to save the children," Nkechi said tearfully. "I'll sell my jewelry if I have to." Chief Amadi shook his head. "We'll get through this. We just need to stay strong." The breaking point came one fateful night when Buchi's condition worsened. Her breathing grew shallow, her body burning with fever despite the medications. Nkechi cradled her baby in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably as Chief Amadi frantically called their driver to rush them to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctors tried everything: oxygen masks, IV drips, and emergency medication, but Buchi's little body continued to weaken. Nkechi knelt in the corner of the room, praying desperately. "God, please save my children! Whatever it is, take it away!" she cried, her voice hoarse from sobbing. As dawn broke, Buchi stabilized, but her frailty left the doctors gravely concerned. "We've done all we can," the doctor told Nkechi and Chief Amadi. "You might want to consider taking her abroad for specialized treatment." One day, during a routine checkup with Dr. Ifeanyi, a devout and compassionate physician, who usually comes to the hospital on appointment and once in 3 months, he asked Nkechi an unusual question. "Who have you helped recently?" Dr. Ifeanyi asked, his voice calm but firm. Nkechi stared at Dr. Ifeanyi, confused by his question. "Who have I helped recently?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Dr. Ifeanyi said, his gaze unwavering. "Have you given away any personal items, money, clothes, or anything that belonged to your family?" Nkechi hesitated, her mind racing. Then she remembered. The trip to the village, the clothes, shoes, and money she had given to Oluchi. Her heart sank as the realization struck. "I gave some of my children's outgrown clothes and shoes to my former colleague in the village," she said slowly. "I also gave her some foodstuffs and money." Dr. Ifeanyi leaned back in his chair, his expression somber. "Those clothes were taken to a dark altar," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "Someone used them to curse your family. That's why your children are sick and your husband's business is failing." Nkechi's heart pounded in her chest. "Oluchi?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why would she do this?" Dr. Ifeanyi sighed deeply. "Sometimes envy can drive even the closest of friends to terrible acts. But this is not the end, Nkechi. God is still on your side. The battle is his, not yours." Dr. Ifeanyi led Nkechi into his office and began to pray fervently for her and her daughter. His voice was strong, filled with conviction, as he rebuked the curse placed on her family. "Every evil plan against this family is broken in the name of Jesus," he declared, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he prayed. After the prayer, he handed Nkechi a piece of paper with several Bible verses written on it. "Pray these psalms at midnight for the next 7 days," he instructed. "God will fight for you, and he will reveal the truth." Nkechi clutched the paper tightly, nodding through her tears. "Thank you, Doctor. I will do as you say." When Nkechi returned home, she told Chief Amadi everything. His face turned pale as he listened, and he muttered, "Blood of Jesus," repeatedly, pacing the room in disbelief. "That woman, Oluchi!" he exclaimed, shaking his head. "How could she do this to us?" But there was no time for anger. That night, Nkechi gathered her family, and they knelt together in their living room. The atmosphere was heavy with emotion as they prayed fervently, crying out to God for deliverance. For the first time in weeks, Nkechi felt a glimmer of hope. Over the next few days, Nkechi followed Dr. Ifeanyi's instructions, praying the Psalms every midnight. With each prayer, she felt a weight lifting from her heart. Slowly, the changes began. Buchi's fever subsided, and she started eating again. Kane's rashes began to fade, and Obina's headaches became less frequent. Chief Amadi's business also showed signs of recovery. A major client who had pulled out of a deal suddenly returned, offering an even better contract. The family's finances, though still strained, began to stabilize. Nkechi felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. But she couldn't shake the thought of Oluchi and the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her family. Meanwhile, in the village, Oluchi's life was unraveling. Her youngest child fell gravely ill with symptoms eerily similar to those Nkechi's children had experienced. No herbal remedy or medicine seemed to help. At first, Oluchi thought it was a coincidence, but when her husband's small farming business suffered an unexpected fire, she began to panic. Desperate for answers, she returned to the native doctor. He greeted her with a knowing look. "The curse you placed has backfired," he said simply. The family you tried to destroy is protected by a higher power. Now, the consequences are yours to bear. Oluchi collapsed to her knees, wailing, "No, please reverse it. My child is innocent." The native doctor shook his head. "Once set in motion, curses like these cannot be undone. You sought to destroy an innocent family, and now the suffering has returned to you." Filled with guilt and despair, Oluchi called Nkechi one evening. Her voice trembled as she confessed everything. The jealousy that had consumed her, the trip to the native doctor, and the curse she had placed on Nkechi's family. "I'm so sorry," Oluchi wept. "I don't know what came over me. I was blinded by envy. Please forgive me." Nkechi's hands shook as she held the phone. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of anger, sorrow, and relief. "Oluchi," she said quietly, "I trusted you. I would have done anything to help you. Why did you do this?" "I was bitter," Oluchi admitted, sobbing. "I saw your life, your children, your wealth, and I hated what I didn't have." Nkechi closed her eyes, her heart heavy. "I forgive you," she said after a long pause. "But I can't forget this. Our friendship is over." As Nkechi and her family healed, their faith grew stronger. They continued to pray together, grateful for the second chance they had been given. The children regained their strength, and Chief Amadi's business flourished once more. Oluchi, however, was left to face the consequences of her actions. Her child's health worsened, and her family sank deeper into poverty. She was haunted by regret, realizing too late that envy had cost her everything. Please be prayerful and watchful during this festive season. Give, but pray over any item before you give them out. May God bless and protect you. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.